Hey everybody, hope you're doing well today and welcome back to Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course, Greatest Hits, Level 1. This video is lesson 14 and we're going to cover pages 28 and 29 today. The song by the Beatles, She Loves You. All right, so once again, welcome back. If you are not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe. That way you can stay up to date with all the latest lesson videos. And if you get a chance, check out my Patreon page, Piano Mountain over at Patreon. And if you're feeling up to it, I'd love a donation, but you are not obligated to do so. You can just enjoy these lessons for free, which I love doing. So we're going to dig into pages 28 and 29. This is a short, meaning only 2 pages lesson, but a very difficult lesson at the same time. We're just at that point in this book where these pieces are getting pretty challenging. Now, there's a few things I want to say about this piece before we get started. Of course, the first thing at the top of page 28 over on the right, it says use after page 83. That is if you've been following along in the lesson books, the Level 1 Alfred Adult Lesson Book series. You're going to wait till at least page 83 to start this lesson. And as always, I recommend starting even later. To be honest, the challenging nature of these pieces at this point, almost level 2 is maybe even a good place to start. I'm going to leave it up to you, though, of course. You can start anytime you want, but certainly not before page 83. Now, like I said, it's only 2 pages, but there's a lot going on here. And I have to admit, when I opened up this book today and I said, She Loves You, I don't know this song. Now, I didn't look at John Lennon, Paul McCartney. That should be the dead giveaway. But I was like, I don't know this song. Let me pull this up on YouTube and just get a feel for it. And I listened to the actual Beatles recording. And I was like, oh yeah, this song, very, very famous, very popular. But when I did that, I try not to listen to recordings too often because the thing that I ended up wrestling with for a second is that it's actually a pretty fast song. Now it says moderately fast. So to get to the nature of the piece as the Beatles intended, it's going to end up being pretty fast. Now, I've always said in all these lessons, you don't have to do that unless you really love the song, because obviously the thing that takes the most time when learning a piece of music is getting it up to speed and taking no shortcuts to get there, meaning you need to learn all the basics, all the notes, all the rhythms and all that. Speed is the last thing. But once you've learned all that, then it's just kind of, playing through it again and again and again. And only if you want to take the time because you love that piece is it really worth it. Now, if you want to move to the next lesson after learning this at a slow pace, that's fine. But when I listened to that recording and then I looked at it in the book here and I said, well, it's almost like it needs to go even faster and 0 pedal. Now, if you notice in page 28, it says there's pedal markings there. And then it says simile. I think simile is how we say that. which means in the same manner. So in this case, it says at the bottom of the page, continue pedaling once per measure until the next pedal marking, which doesn't occur to page 29. So again, I was listening to the Beatles recording and I was like, I feel like pedal actually takes away from the percussive nature. Now, the recording had the drums, and the way they were almost shout singing, if you will. It makes it kind of feel percussive. But then I go back to a couple of things. I'm like, well, we're not doing a band, we're doing the piano. And the piano is just a different instrument where we're trying to incorporate everything onto one instrument. Again, the piano. Now, the piano is good at doing that, but the piano is just, again, one instrument. And of course, the more important, factor is that this is a hard piece when you play it that fast. So I come to the conclusion, and this may be more information you want to know, we're going to treat this not like a ballad, but more ballad-like. And I say that if you do know this piece, because, honestly, the Beatles, they're obviously one of the most, if not the most famous bands in rock history. So anywhere around the world, most people have heard of the Beatles. And again, this is a very popular song. And this happens all the time with piano music. You encounter a piece, and the question it comes down to is, do you want to play the piece exactly as you heard it, whether that's on another instrument or a band, or do you want to play it how it suits the instrument, in this case, the piano? So we're going to kind of be a little bit of both. We're still going to try to get it up to speed, but we're also going to incorporate the pedaling. And again, where you're at, especially if you're in level 1 of that lesson book, page 83, you're going to want to keep this kind of on the slow side. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense. Like I said, I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but this is a good question that I'm always asking myself, both as a performer and as a teacher. Sometimes it's just, do we want to make the piece sound like how it was originally intended? Or do we want to incorporate it so it sounds the best on the piano? And like I said, today, maybe a little bit of both, probably leaning more towards what it sounds like on the piano and to make it a little bit easier for us. So we're going to go at a slower tempo, especially here at the beginning. Let's note a few things before we start digging into actual music notes. First off, we're on the key of G major, 1 sharp. So all Fs are sharp. We're in 4/4, basic 4/4 time signature, 4 beats per measure. There are a lot of eighth notes spread throughout the piece. So when you're in 4/4 time and you have eighth notes, you're going to start counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You're not just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. That being said, there's also syncopation. Syncopation is even trickier, so all the more reason to really break down that counting. And syncopation basically is when you see a tie. In this case, the first full measure on page 28 going into the second measure. There's syncopation, that D in the right hand, the eighth note tied to the dotted half note in the next measure. That is a little bit of syncopation right there. And there's a few other places in the piece where that similar syncopation occurs. In fact, I'm scanning the piece and it always seems to be the same rhythm. It's always on the and of beat 4 tied into beat 1 of the next measure. So at least there's a consistency. All right, so the roadmap starts with a pickup note. Your left hand has got the thumb on D. That is on beat 4. So remember the rule for a pickup measure, it's not beat 1. You're not going to go 1 and then 1, 2, 3. It's going to be beat 4. And you can give yourself a nice count off by doing that. You can go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and. But we're going to hold off on a second on the left hand. We're going to do the right hand first. But I wanted you to know that the very first note is only in the left hand and it's on beat 4. So you're going to play through all of page 28. You're going to go through the top line of 29. And on page 29, you've got the second line. When you get to measure 22 and 23, notice it says first ending. That's what that bracket with the 1 means. That's first ending. So the very first time you play the piece, you're going to play those 2 measures. And then it repeats back to the beginning. But when it repeats back to the beginning, it does not go to the D. Notice that repeat sign is after that D. It's on the first full measure. So you're coming back to the G's actually on beat 1. Second time through, you play everything exactly the same. When you get to page 29, you're going to go down to measure 20, 21, and then you're going to skip 22 and 23 and go down to measure 24. And there's where you have the second ending. So you're going to play that all the way to the end of the piece. So not too complicated as far as the roadmap. But let's look at notes first in the right hand. I'm going to focus more on notes and fingering, of course. So you're in your G position. So remember the G position starts out here, G, A, B, C, D. But it's not going to take long for us to be jumping around. So be ready for some jumping around in and out of that position. So you got G, A, B, and then C and D. And that's the D that we said is tied. Now in the second measure, notice that your next note is a D, an eighth note, but the third finger. And the reason that happens is the reason you're switching to 3 is it's setting you up for notes that you're not going to be able to reach with 5 on the D. So 3 on D puts 4 on E, and then the last measure, that's 5 on F. Whoops, F sharp. I already forgot about my sharp. So you got F sharp and then back to D. You got a D dotted quarter note, and then the last note of that line is B. Measure 4, you're back to D, F sharp, and then D. And then the last D in measure 4 is your fifth finger. So you can get down to your next note, which is thumb on G in measure 5, and then A, B, C, and D. Seems familiar because now we're repeating the beginning of the piece. So measure 5 is like measure 1. And just like the beginning, in measure 6 here on the second line, third finger to D. D, E, F sharp, D, D dotted quarter note, and then B, measure 8, back to D, F sharp, D. You have a little eighth rest and then your second finger on 3 Ds. Measure 9, E, and then our first harmony in the right hand, B and G, 1 and 5. And then that thumb is going to drop down to G, A, and the next measure, 3 on B, and notice the big switch here, 5 on B. And that's so we can get to 4 on A, 3 on G, and ultimately down to the thumb on E in our last measure. And then you're back to 3 on G. Measure 12 at the bottom, F sharp with your second finger, thumb on E, 2 Gs. Measure 13, you got 4 on A, and then you're going to have 3 on A, and then you're going to have A twice with the second finger, and then the next measure, thumb on A. So interesting, almost all 5 fingers are played on A's. So let's do that again. Measure 13. 4 on A, 3 on A, 2 on A twice, and then measure 14, thumb on A, and again thumb on A. Bring that second finger over to C, and then ultimately 5 up to G, and then 2 and 4 on D and F sharp. And there's that syncopation again. That D and F sharp is syncopated, coming in on the and of 4, and then you're not playing it on beat 1. And in fact, you're holding it through the end of the page. Now be alert, because at the top of page 29, measure 16, we got a big jump. The F sharp that you're currently on with your fourth finger, bring your thumb up to the F sharp, and then the high note's a D. And I know it's really hard to see, but they actually wrote D inside of that note, indicating that's a note we have not played before, or maybe very rarely at this point in the book. So F sharp and D. So this is interesting. You are on D and F sharp at the bottom of 28, but then you're flipping it, F sharp and D. So that's a dotted half note, and then you have an eighth rest, and then second finger comes down back to that D. And remember, it was when you did the D and F sharp at the bottom of 28, the second finger was on that D. So you're kind of coming back to the same position you left. So you're here, up to F sharp and D, then go back to 2 on D. So measure 17, we've got E, B and G again on the half note. Measure 18, B and F sharp, Notice it's the fourth finger on the F sharp. And then B and E, that'd be 1 and 3. And then the last note of that measure is 2 on D. Your last measure on the line is 3 on E, C sharp and G with 1 and 5, and again, C sharp and G. Remember the rule, it's still a C sharp because it's in the same measure. Go down to measure 20. Now we have C sharp and F sharp. So it doesn't look like it at first, but both of those are black keys because C sharp and then F's are sharped. So keep that in mind. You're going from C sharp and G, and your G's coming down a half step. Now you know it's down a half step. The tendency is to use the fourth finger like I did. You're going to need to bring your fifth finger there. Oh, I'm sorry. You actually need to move your second finger to C sharp and 5 to F sharp. So even though it's very subtle movement, it's actually more movement with the fingering. But again, the reason that's happening is because it needs to set us up for where we need to go next. Where we're going next is C sharp and E. 2 and 4, and then thumb on B's. There's 3 B's. Now, the next measure in 21, that is A and C natural. Now, the rule is in measure 20, we have C sharp and C sharp again. But the next measure, it cancels it. So it's a C natural. 9 out of 10 times, almost all music writes in a natural, even though they don't have to. I feel like we've gotten used to that, or I've gotten used to that. But the rule is in 21, they shouldn't have to do that. In 21, that's understood as a C natural because the bar line cancels out that sharp. So it's A and C 3 times, 8th rest, and then actually a 4th time as an 8th note. And then the first ending, measure 22, B flat and D. 3rd finger and the 5th finger. Played twice because the B flat stays flat. On beat 3, you're back to A and C. And then you have 2 8th notes. Then it's tied, syncopation. And then the last measure, G and B natural. So again, that's no longer B flat. It's a different measure. Then we repeat back to the beginning. So everything's exactly the same from the beginning in the right hand. So you're playing through a second time, you're up on page 29, and you get to measure 20, C sharp and F sharp. I'm going to start right there. C sharp and E, 3 B's, A and C again, 3rd time, 8th rest, A and C, and then we're going to go down to the second ending. Now the second ending is a lot like the first ending. It's B flat and D again on beats 1 and 2. Even beat 3 is A and C. But then beat 4 is D. Measure 25, 3rd finger on G. Then you're going to have a big jump. B and G, 1 and 5. Measure 26, B and F sharp. So here's a situation where it is down a half step and you can use your 4th finger. So B and F sharp, followed by B and E with 1 and 3. Last measure, you rest for 2 counts and then B and G. Measure 28, B and F sharp, B and E. 29, you rest, jump up slightly, C and G with 1 and 5. And then measure 30. Same thing, 1 and 4 on C and F sharp, C and E with 1 and 3. And then our last measure, you're going to jump down. You've got G, B, and E. 1, 2, and 5. Now, the G and the B is a whole note. The E is a quarter note that moves down to D while holding G and B. So it's like this. See how that works? It's like this creates a little bit of tension, and the D resolves it. And that's a G chord that it resolves it to. So the E creates tension, and the D resolves it. So that covers the notes in the right hand. Now, we want to get to the counting a little bit. So back at the beginning, we've got quarter notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and then 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. So there's our first little bit of syncopation with eighth notes. Beat 4. So the C's on 4 and the D's on and then you're holding it. When something comes in on and then you're holding it on the next big beat, which is beat 1, that's basically syncopation. That's basic syncopation. And that's what's happening here. So 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. So there's your syncopation. So once again, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and. So there's our next grouping of eighth notes. You've got a long hold, and then all of a sudden you got these eighth notes on beat 4 and 1 and. Now this last measure is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Dotted quarter note, 1.5 beats. It comes in on beat 3, so that's 3 and 4 and. That last eighth note is your and of beat 4, and then measure 4 on the next line, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So one reason, although the left hand kind of fills in the gaps, but not always, but another reason you want to count in this piece is you're going from, like in measure 4, eighth notes to half notes. So it's the long notes, in this case the half note, that sometimes get shorthanded. So if I'm not counting measure 4, I may accidentally do this. See what I did? I didn't hold that half note long enough. But if I count, it goes 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And a lot of times people rush through those half notes, and you look at your left hand there, it's also holding a half note. And while that happens, you're making it harder on yourself, not just because it's incorrect, but it's like, that's a moment where you actually have a moment to breathe and hold and maybe think ahead. So there's more than one reason why you want to hold a note when it's meant to be held. And one of those reasons is it actually helps you out. It gives you a little more time. So measure 4, once again, we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now when we get to this G in measure 5, it all repeats again, just like the beginning. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now that's a little different there in measure 8. So in measure 8, you've got an eighth rest, and that's on beat 3. And then it's and 4 and. So 3 and 4 and, those 3 Ds. So at the beginning of measure 8, it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And you want to go right into beat 1 of the next measure. So one more time at measure 8, and then we'll keep going. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 measure 12. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now there's that last measure there. That's definitely a spot you want to count out. And you're thinking, it's easy, it's just a whole note. Well, that's why it's hard, because we think it's just a whole note. And even with the left hand's got a half note there, and your right hand's not playing. So that measure is an easy one for people to just breeze on through. But look at page 29. Remember we said earlier, you got to get up here. So you have time to do it. You got a little more time. If you rush through it, you're going to be like, oh, no, I'm not there in time. So again, it's a win-win. You're not only doing what's written and what's correct, but it helps you get to where you're going, especially in a tricky spot like at the top of 16. The other thing I want to point out is in measure 12, 13, 14 especially, that's the place where, you keep changing fingering. And if you're not comfortable doing that, you may find it easy when you just play through the notes. But going through all these rhythms, not only are you changing fingers on the same notes, but you're going through mixed rhythms. You have a quarter note, you have a half note, you have 2/8 notes, and then a quarter note. It gets a little trickier. So you may need to practice measure 13 and 14 a little bit more. And if you find that that's tricky, it is tricky. So don't feel bad about spending a little more time on that. It is very unusual and not that common to be switching fingers that often on the same note. The reason they did it is if you switch fingers, if you jump from like 5 to 1, big jumps can get a little careless. They're a little more tricky, but this actually helps keep it a little bit smoother when you just switch one finger at a time. I mean, eventually what it is it's a bridge connecting this E down here in measure 12, ultimately up to this high G. And so that's a smooth way with this finger shifts to do that, even though it's still awkward. So at the top of page 29, we've got this dotted half note. It's actually one of the only, if not the only dotted half note in the whole piece that's not tied. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and. When you have an eighth note on the and of beat 4, we've had a few of these already, but I just want to point out, always practice to beat 1. You've heard me say this before in many other lessons. Don't get in the habit of doing measure 16 like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then stop. Because what happens is we tend to linger on that last eighth note, and then it ends up becoming a quarter note unintentionally. So when you put it all together, you end up with this. See what happened? That D and the next E are the same, but they're not. And that also affects the style. Remember I said earlier in the video, I said, the style of this piece is that it's moving right along. And this is the chorus, by the way, of the piece. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. Someone posted in a comment recently, which I have yet to respond to, but I know what I'm going to respond. Said you should sing along. The reason I don't sing along is because I need to actually produce a decent singing voice and not mess you guys up. My intention of these videos is to help you. I'm just not a singer, and part of it is probably I don't want to. I guess I could learn it. Anyone can learn it, right? I just don't sing. So you're absolutely right. Singing along is extremely helpful. It just helps internalize so much more. It helps you hear the next note probably before you even play it. And every teacher I've had has encouraged me to do that, but they've never pushed me to the point where I've obviously been doing that. So just throwing that out there, singing along, yeah. If you could sing the right pitches. I'm terrible at that. But my point is, this is the chorus. This is the part everyone knows. That little push gets that whole chorus energized. And if you do this, it almost feels lazy and it takes out the energy. So if you're ever wondering, yeah, the eighth note's a quarter note, no big deal. I disagree. It is a big deal. That eighth note energizes this whole chorus, which is the most important part everyone knows of this song. Pretty much maybe the most important note of the whole song, if you want to argue it. The fact that you made it a quarter note versus an eighth note takes away. Yes, it's that important. So when you're doing this, back to counting it slower here, 16. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and. Always go to that next note in the next measure. That way, if I hold that note, that's fine. It's a little bit longer. It's a quarter note. But I'm practicing that eighth note. You see what I'm getting at? I'm making sure that eighth note's not lazy. So one more time, and we'll keep going. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Same thing there, right? It's a repeat. And 1 and 2 and 3. Different notes, but the last two measures there, that D on the words she loves you, yeah. Make sure it's and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So be ready for all these eighth notes in measure 20. So did I should circle that 5 and 2. I don't have a pencil, but I'm not picking up that finger change very well in measure 20. So remember, at the top of page 29 in measure 19, you've got 1 and 5 on C sharp and G. Measure 20, you got to change to 2 and 5 on C sharp, F sharp. So I think I forgot that. So right there at measure 20, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And so you're off on 4. So measure 21 is another spot where you have eighth note on the and of 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And 1. So really make sure that that's not lazy. And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and syncopation right there, tied, and then 2 and 3 and then you're off. Repeats back to the beginning. You're going through the whole piece a second time. Measure 21 on page 29. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Second ending. 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that's a little different than the first ending. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, from here to the end of the piece, you're thinking, oh, finally, it's just half notes. Easy. Yeah, deceptive, right? Because I could breeze right through them. No, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You might say, why are you so slow? Those are supposed to be faster. You're right. The whole piece is supposed to be faster. It's a very valid question if anyone out there is asking that right now, because you're absolutely right. It feels like it should be faster. The point is, we're going so slow because those spots where there's eighth notes and syncopation, that's really tough to get in at a faster speed. So all this other stuff is really, really easy, but we have to make sure the glue of the piece is intact. And when I say the glue, I'm talking about the even counting. So if you have a piece where 90% of the notes are half notes and 10% are eighth notes, and you're speeding up all those half notes, and then when you get to the eighth notes and you just mumble jumble it, that's all people are going to remember. And that's all you're going to remember is be like, oh, I've rushed through the easy stuff and I've butchered the 10% of the hard stuff. So that's kind of the idea there. So hang with it. If any of you are feeling like these should be faster, this is why we count. So at measure 25, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And so you got that half rest there in measure 27. 1 and again 27. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So yeah, it does kind of lay low. Now in the end, now the left hand does have a little more motion. The left hand does have eighth notes, so your left hand's actually gonna be busier, and that'll make more sense once you put the hands together. But you heard me play, the recording early on in the video, and so you heard at the faster tempo how some of those eighth notes and the syncopation really flies pretty fast. So again, we want to make sure everything's on the same page, so to speak. And to make sure we get those eighth notes and syncopation and everything else in line with it, some of those longer notes are going to feel really long at this speed. And that's okay. That's the way you do it. Left hand. We haven't done the rhythm yet, specifically in the right hand. Wait, what am I saying? We just did it. Okay. X that. Left hand. We haven't done any of the notes yet in the left hand is what I meant to say. So remember, G position also in the left hand. You got your thumb on D above middle C, and that's on beat 4. Then you're going to go to 5 on G. I'm not going to do the rhythms yet. Let's just focus on notes. B and D. And then B and D again. Now, the next measure, jump way down. 5 on E. And then G and B. Notice it's the same sort of pattern. The first measure, G and then B and D. E and then G and B. It feels the same, right? It's the same intervals, the same spread of notes. Now it's a little different in the last measure, but somewhat similar. 5 to B, and then D and F, but it's D and F sharp. So that's what's a little different. So there's a similar pattern here. And the hardest thing about this is the fifth finger, G down to E, down to B. So that fifth finger is always leading you. Measure 4, the fifth finger comes up to D. Now this spread's a little different. This is a bit wider, F sharp and C. Measure 5, you got to bring your fourth finger, not fifth finger, but fourth finger to G. Interesting they did that. Probably so you don't have to jump as far. But it's like the beginning again, G and then B and D. Now you can go to 5 on E in the next measure, G and B. And then the last measure down to B, D and F sharp. Measure 8, 5 on D, F sharp and C. Measure 9, 5 on D, and now G and B. Same thing in the next measure, measure 10, D and G and B. Your fourth finger should be on the E in the last measure here, measure 11. Still the G and the B. 12, same thing, E, G and B. Measure 13, 5 on C, E flat in G. Same thing in measure 13. Now, interesting, measure 15, they didn't give us fingering. So if you went to 5 on D, that would be fine. In fact, I looked ahead to measure 17 on the next page. It has a 4 on E. So that suggests 5 on D. So let's do that. Measure 15, 5 on D, F sharp and C. I would do 3 on the F sharp and 1 on the C. It's a little bit stronger. Then you're not having to reach back with the pinky as far when you get to measure 16. So measure 16, 5 on D, F sharp and C again. Measure 17, your fourth finger will be right there for E. And then B and G. E, B, and G in measure 18. Measure 19, way down to A. So that's a little tough. You might need to practice that a few times. Going from 4 on E down to 5 on A. C sharp and E. Same thing in measure 20. Although notice a quarter rest. And that's kind of useful because you got an unusual chord here to get to in measure 21. C, E flat, and A. So you're going from A, C sharp and E to C natural, E flat, and A. Practice that a bunch. That's tough. Measure 22, another big chord, D, F sharp, and C. So from here to here. It's almost the same layout. Look at my fingering in the notes. So 5, 3, 1. White, black, white. Let's go to measure 22. The only thing different is I'm spreading my thumb out a little bit further, but 5, 3, 1. White, black, white. So study that similarity. On paper, it doesn't look like they're similar, but on the keyboard, they're more similar than we think. And that's what's going to help you memorize it. And then the last measure of that line, bring the 5 up to G. So you're back in the G position. So G, B, and then A, B, C, D, back to the beginning, which is G. And then all of this repeats. So skip over to page 29 again, measure 21. We're on this odd chord. We're going to go down to measure 24 now. It's still the same as the first ending chord, the D, F sharp, C, so that's good. And measure 25, G position, 5 on G, just like the beginning. But measure 26, you have G, B, and D, and then a quick rest, and then D. I would do the second finger on G. D, G, third on F sharp, and then that puts that 4 right on the E as they suggest. Measure 28, E, G, and B. Now notice your third finger moves to the E here, so E, D, C, measure 29, E and G. Same in the next measure. And then the last measure, jump down to G and B, or G and D, excuse me, 5 and 1. Now your left hand rhythmically is very, very consistent, very repetitive, with the exception of the last 2 lines of the piece. It's almost always quarter note, half note, quarter note. So with the exception, of course, of the pickup note at the beginning, we've got 1. I'm not going to count the ands for just a moment, just to speed things along. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So just pointing out, you see how that rhythm is very similar. That continues rhythmically almost the entire piece. Like I said, on pages 29, well, basically on page 29, the last 3 lines, which is most of the page, is different. But the beginning of this piece, it's the same rhythm. So if I did the ands, it'd be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So I'm not going to dig into the rhythm individually with the left hand because of that. Just to save time, let's go ahead and put hands together. We're going to focus on the coordination, the hits, before we get into counting. I'll break down the counting in the left hand more when we get to the different parts starting in measure 20. But the first page, so remember we said the G position in both hands. You start with the left hand on the D. Both hands play G. And then next beat, both hands play. Now this is where the left hand is going to hold the B and the D, and the right hand moves to B. And then beat 4, they both play together. And then you have these eighth notes, 4 and 1. Now you're going to want to work on that little transition. The hard thing about this piece, one of the many hard things, is especially when you have the syncopation, 4 and you got to be ready for 1. But the thing is, beat 1 in the left hand is always a note you got to jump down to. So there's a lot to think about and do in this short time. So 4 and 1. So you may need to practice that a lot. And then you might feel rushed with that. 4 and 1. So you may say, I need to get to G and B quickly. But it's not, because it's 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. So when we're going at this slow tempo, once again, the eighth notes don't feel so slow, but everything else does. And you got to do that. You don't want to get in the habit of doing this. Doesn't even sound like the song anymore when you put it all together. So if you start playing eighth notes, even like everything like an eighth note, you know, it's not going to sound like the song. So you got to hang out for a while and go 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. And I said we weren't going to do the counting just yet. We were going to do the hits, but I'm go ahead and throwing that out there. So when you get to beat 4 of this measure, it's kind of the same thing, 4 and 1 and, but harder, because I've got to move up. I don't have a tie. I've got to move up to that F sharp, 4 and 1 and down to the B. So might have to work on that. So you've got on beat 1 and then beat 2, we're here. Beat 3, it's D again in the right hand, 3 and 4 and. I'll tell you what, I am going to work on the counting. I can't avoid it. So back at the beginning. Let's do that much from the beginning with counting. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and. Now that is a hard spot. Measure 3 going to measure 4. So measure 3, it gets tricky on beat 3, where the dotted chord note is. So I've got 3 and this is 4 and. So don't forget the left hand's right on beat 4. 3 and 4 and 1. And then you got to work on getting into beat 1. What happens to beat 1 the next measure is you're still on the D, so that's easy, but you got to move to 5 on D in the left hand. So once again from the same spot, it's 3 and 4 and 1 and. Starting at the beginning of measure 3, it's going to be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. A lot of movement. So in beat measure 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and. I mentioned that earlier. This is a spot both hands are playing a half note. Count it out. Don't rush it. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That gives you time to move to your 5th finger on D. So 4 and 1. Got to move the 4 to G. 1 and 2 and. Now it's like the beginning, right? So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now I'm going to stop right there, measure 8. I did something which isn't a big deal, but during the 8th rest in the right hand, I lifted my left hand. If you did that, that's fine. It's probably even more effective musically, but technically you're not supposed to. So in measure 8, we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and. See, that's technically how you do it. And then on beat 4, you play it again in the left hand. 4 and. So measure 8 again is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. If you do this, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, that's fine. You know, I ended up making that a quarter note. That's fine. Like I said, musically, it almost makes more emphasis. I know it's not what's written, but it makes sense to do it if you did it by accident. But if you don't want to get any bad habits, I understand that, and we'll do it as written. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. Now measures 10 and 11 there feels like we're putting on the brakes. It's not, though. We're counting it out with the ands. You can feel how it fits right in. So you might be like, I'm going too slow again. No, you're not. But if you don't count, you might mess you up. So I sound like a broken record about this, but it's just, we're laying foundations still. We're still in level 1. We don't want bad habits in our, as we're learning piano, as we're learning music. And one of those great habits is to understand keeping that steady beat no matter how long the rhythms are. This is the foundation. We're building our foundation right now. Our house, our nice, pretty house will come, but without the foundation, the house will crumble. So here we are. So, yeah, measure 9 and 10, 10 and 11, once again would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. A lot of back and forth feeling, too, between the hands. Measure 12, we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. So again, measure 13 and 14 and 15 may still be one of the trickiest spots for you, because we've already discussed in the right hand all the finger changes on the A's. We discussed how it's mixed rhythm on those finger changes. We have not really harder notes in the left hand. It's not bouncing around as much, but we do have, this E flat, which is a little different. But then, of course, pairing it all together with both hands, it's a lot to think of. So you may still at this point feel like, this part is hard. Rightfully so, though. It is. It's still going to be tricky. So slow, counting, measure 12. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. Now there's an important half note, because as you're sitting on there and counting that out, you've got time to think about this, which really takes off because you got 2 eighth notes with your second finger and then the thumb in the next measure, and then you're moving down to C again. So again, the half note to your advantage. So once again, measure 12 one more time. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Now right there, I keep going to my 4th finger, but I don't want to do that. I want my 5th finger. We talked about that earlier. So I measure 14, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. It's a little bit more of a jump, but it gets us situated for eventually measure 17. So right there at measure 15, we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and. So remember that big jump. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And that's the spot we said that is the Energizer 8th note, which prompts the chorus. So be ready for that. Now, we talked about it in the right hand, but when you add both hands, it's very easy now to hold on to that note because you're like, where is that E? Oh, there it is. But keep in mind, this is why we had 5 on D, right? So watch my hand. If I've got 5 on D and I go to F sharp and C with 3 and 1, where does that put my 4th finger? Almost certainly on E. So it's there. So I don't have to search. It's right there. Another reason why we set up fingering in advance. It's like, why did I change the 5 on D? I could stay on 4. Well, if I stay on 4, then I'm kind of stuck there in the important part at the beginning of the chorus. Now I'm not stuck. I'm right there. So let's continue. Measure 17. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and. Hard spot. Rhythmically and notes. So measure 18 going to 19. Measure 18, we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Mainly because of this A. You're just going from 2 to 3 in the right hand. But the rhythm, 4 and 1. So you got to be ready for that A. You don't want to go 4 and 1. That's the other thing. Just because you're saying and doesn't mean you're actually doing and. You can't say 4 and 1. If you find yourself doing that, forget counting for a moment. Just practice the notes. Back up. Whoops. Practice just the notes. Then once you feel like, okay, now I know where I'm going, go back, put the counting in. So at measure 18, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, and I still don't want to do that. I do not want to do that. The C sharp and F sharp, 2 and 5 at measure 20. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You know, one thing I almost did, and I'll share this because maybe there's one person out there that would do this. I almost did this at measure 20. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. See what I did? I saw 4/8 notes in a row, which are the only 4/8 notes in a row in the whole piece, and automatically my brain said faster. Well, yeah, they're 8th notes. They are faster, but I went twice as fast as I'm counting. It's technically 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Whoops. I'm glad I did that because I wanted you to know that that chord in measure 21 in the left hand doesn't come naturally. It needs a little practice. So 20 and 21, this is tough. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now what we talked about earlier on measure 8, I said if you lift your left hand ahead of time, it's okay musically. Here's a case where they wrote it that way. So at measure 21, we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. The left hand does release on beat 4. Yeah, I realized in measure 8 it was beat 3 we would be releasing, but it's the same effect. So here's proof of how that works musically effectively. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So be off on beat 4 right there in the measure 22. And that's going to help you also get up to that 5 on G. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and both hands are on 2 and 3 and 4 and right in the middle of this run, your left hand comes off. 3, so 3 and 4 and 1, but you're right back there on G. Going back to the beginning, remember you do not hit the D, the repeat sign is here. So you're going to repeat, do everything the same through the top of 29, measure 20, 21. We'll pick it up right there, second time. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So both hands are the exact same thing as the first ending here in the second ending, measure 24. So 1 and 2 and 3 and that's different. The D on beat 4, notice the left hand rests. And then it's going to resituate. Is that a word? You're going to situate your left hand up back in the G position. But not your right hand. Your right hand's got 3 on G. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and at the end I almost went 1 and it feels like it should do that. It feels like it should do that because the piece goes faster. So it would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and if I got it up to speed, but it's 1 and 2 and at this speed. So once you hit measure 25, it feels like, again, the brakes are on, but keep counting it out. That will ensure that you don't make that spot any faster than it should be. And you still have these eighth notes. So if you go too fast, you'll either have this. You'll be rushing trying to get those in, or you'll just play them as quarter notes. And if you do it as quarter notes, you lose the feel because it's supposed to be. See how that works? But I played it smoothly. And so ultimately, yeah, you want it to be faster. But like I said, if you do that right now and you're trying to get those eighth notes fast, you may not be ready to play them that fast yet. So whether you play this piece up to speed or whether you just say, I'm just going to learn it for the basics and then move on, in both cases, get it down slow. It's just the golden rule. Get it down slow. So we went through it with the counting. I'm going to play it straight through now with the counting. We haven't talked about pedal or dynamics. We will in just a little bit, but there's not a whole lot to say about it. But I'm going to play it now all the way through with the repeats. And I'm going to go slow as a practice tempo. I'll give a count off, but I'm not going to count the whole time. So here we go at the very beginning. 1 and 2 and 3 and. All right, so not perfect. There were a couple of times I missed a finger or I missed a count or little details here or there. So hopefully that still gives you the gist of it and that was helpful for you. But like I said, if you want to hear it all up to tempo, I'll have a separate video, or you can go back to the beginning of this video and listen to it there as well. And the only thing left to talk about at this point is pedaling and dynamics, and then speed, of course. But the pedal, you notice they don't mark much because it's pretty similar. So I don't have a pedal cam today, and at this point, you should be feeling comfortable enough with pedaling that we don't need to do that. But really, it's very consistent. You're pedaling every measure. And the only time that you're not pedaling is at measure 21 on page 29. Notice at 21, it ends. The pedal is up and off on beat 4. And then everything under that first ending is no pedal. And when you get back to the beginning, the repeat, there's pedal. Now, the pickup note at the beginning, by the way, there's no pedal. I don't know why. I think it sounds fine. So if you want to have the pedal down at the very beginning on that pickup note, you can. It's part of the chord. That D fits. Unless they're just trying to keep it like sort of a light pickup feel, and then everything comes down on beat 1. That I can understand, but it's up to you. You can do it as written, or you could have the pedal down. So the first ending, there's no pedaling. And with the second ending, just that one measure, there's no pedaling. But when you get back to measure 25, up to the end, it's every single measure again. So the pedaling is very easy. It's always at the very beginning. Now, if you say, but how do I pedal? I forgot. I don't know offhand what lesson it was, but if you go back to the Alfred's Basic Adult Lesson Book, Level 1 series, sort of halfway in that series, maybe a little bit closer to the beginning, there is a lesson I did that's strictly pedaling. And there's a song, a quick song that goes along with it, harp song. So you might want to look for that lesson. If I remember, I'll put the link in this video, but there's a good chance I won't remember. But that's where you can get more tips on how to pedal. But as far as the timing of your pedaling, it's always going to be the beginning of every single measure. Dynamics, there's not a lot to it in this piece. It's a pop rock song, so pretty loud. The chorus is louder, which that's usually always the case. The ending, though, makes sense dynamically. Those yeah, yeah, yeahs, every one of them gets softer and softer. So at measure 25, we're forte. And then a little softer. And then soft. So it makes sense that each one of those sections gets softer and softer as we're fading out to the end. And as far as speed, so like I said, and like I say on all my lessons, and this is true of my students that I have in person, more so my adult students. My kids students, I kind of make them work harder because, they're kids. Who knows? They'll maybe grow up to be pianists. So I want to push them as hard as I can. With adult students, a lot of my adults are retired. They're kind of doing this for fun. And they want to learn, but sometimes they just want to have fun. And a lot of times they may be going through these lesson series and saying, I just want to spend time on the pieces that I like. But at the same time, you've heard me say it before, you don't want to skip to those pieces because you're skipping over other pieces that have taught us something. And that's where I say, as long as you learn a piece slow, that's fine. Because I believe once you've learned it slow, you've learned the fingering, you've learned the notes and rhythms, you've learned all the basics. To get a piece fast at that point, yeah, sometimes you change your fingering around. When you do something faster, you might find a fingering that works better. Since we're going from a book that has fingering laid out, that's not the case. But really, in a nutshell, when you're practicing faster, you're just playing a piece more. You're playing it again and again and again to the point that, it's muscle memory and you kind of are memorizing it. So really, it's just time spent. So if someone doesn't really love a piece, I say, learn the basics, learn it slow, move on until you find a piece that you do love, and then you can spend time speeding it up. So I'll end it with that. If you learn it the way we learned it at that slow tempo, I think that's fine. I still think you're learning a lot. you eventually, hopefully, will find a piece that you love and spend, because you don't want to go through every piece on the piano slow. Otherwise, you'd just be playing ballads the rest of your life and really getting in the habit of playing fast pieces slow all the time, which, you know, if you're doing that for yourself, that's fine. If you want to play from others, this piece, for example, if you say you have someone in the family or a friend who's a Beatles fan, they love this song, but they're not a musician, but they love this song. They're not going to understand. They're going to want to hear it fast. They're going to want to sing along, and you're going to be playing a ballad. And they're going to be singing faster and be like, come on, keep up. What are you doing? Unless you tell that person, just say straight out, look, I know you love this piece, but I'm going to play a different version for you. I'm going to play a slow ballad. So, you know, you could always find some excuse, but my point is, learn it slow at that point. If you want to learn it fast, one method is playing it from beginning to end. Sure, that works. That probably takes longer. Play it in small sections, a measure at a time, maybe a line at a time, you know, or like a section at a time. When I say section, it's by the words. So if I'm looking at the words, you think you've lost your love, that's a section. Right there. And you can just focus on that. And just playing that over and over. And once you get that up to speed, go to the next section. Which would be that. And then practice that again. Now, I've already got it up to speed, so just saving time. And then put those two sections together. Obviously, I'm making it look really easy, but working things in sections is actually better in the long run. In the short run, it's very boring. It's very tedious. You want to play it from beginning to end. In the long run, you will learn it faster, though. You play it from beginning to end in 2 weeks, you're not going to have it that much better. But if you organize yourself and say, I'm going to learn maybe 2 lines a day in a week or 2 weeks or whatever, you're probably going to have the piece better because you put more focus into a spot, and it's easier to learn it if you have smaller focus. If you're going from beginning to end, that's a lot of focus. That's spread out, and you're not really giving yourself a chance for it to sink in. So there's my explanation for you. So hopefully all that makes sense. Long video, but I appreciate you guys sticking around. I hope this has been helpful. Let me know in the comments if anything's confusing. I appreciate you guys so much. Hit that subscribe if you haven't. Patreon if you want to make a donation. Good luck with your practicing. I love it. I love hearing from you guys, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.